and welcome back to The Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 2 of The Last Battle, The Rashness of the King.
Whew. This chapter surprised me.
Someone got impaled by a unicorn in the Chronicles of Narnia.
Let's just go ahead and call it what it is. We've known this king for 3 minutes, and he has a unicorn, and his unicorn impales somebody, and he chops somebody's head off.
Yes.
So now that we've discussed the most shocking
This is
part
the
of
most
the
violent
chapter.
the books have ever been, right?
Yeah, so that's how the chapter ends. Let's figure out how we got there.
Okay, that's great. It's an even chapter, means you have the chapter summary.
Have the summary. A summary of Chapter 2. Tyrion, the last of the kings of Narnia, and his unicorn, Jewel, are discussing the recent reports of Aslan in the woods when a centaur named Runewit appears. The king welcomes him, shares a bowl of wine, then asks for more news of Aslan. To his surprise, Runewit instead gravely relays that the stars have not foretold of Aslan's coming, and that the rumors are nothing more than lies. A dryad suddenly appears with a disastrous report that someone is felling trees in Lantern Waste. Enraged, the king goes to see for himself and confirms that logs are being sent downriver and sold to the Calormenes. Shocking them even more is the report that Aslan himself ordered this to be done. Anger builds in Tyrion, and upon seeing the two Calormenes abusing a talking horse, he and the unicorn rush forward and kill them both.
And there ends the most disturbing chapter we've come across so far.
And if anything is true about what we discussed last chapter, it seems like it's just going to get worse, and I can't imagine worse than this.
No, I mean, it's very disturbing. I mentioned that I just reread the whole book about a month ago just to prepare for this season. And each time I've read this book as an adult, which is only about 3 times, I have been really taken aback with chapter 1. And I remember chapter 1 very vividly. I remember I got this book in 5th grade, and I don't know if I'd finished. We talked before. I can't remember if I read all the other ones at that point, but I do remember reading this book in 5th grade. And that first chapter always stayed really with me. It was unsettling, but not in a creepy or horrific way. Just like, ooh, that's not a good relationship, but you don't really know what's to come of it. And it's here in chapter 2 that you see for the first time, like, oh my goodness, this is way worse than I could have thought of. I mean, we have dryads being murdered, and we have, like you said, there's a lot of violence here at the end. And yet I think what's most deeply unsettling is how duped everyone is, except for Runewit, right? You have King Tyrion here, who we meet. We'll discuss him in a second. You have Jewel, and then you have the other Narnians we come across, right? Like the river rat. Was that what it's called? The water rat? I can't remember what the name of that thing is. The water rat, yes. Who are all thinking, well, Aslan said so, and we just go along with it. You're like, oh my goodness, no. Yeah. Like, you're doing horrific things, and this is just the beginning. This is just chapter 2. Well, let's talk about Tyrion and Jewel here. Tyrion, interesting, less than 25 years old, somewhere between 20 and 25, so a very young king. And yet, and from my perspective, he carries himself like quite an old king. Yes. In many ways.
He wants to just get out of town and spend some time at the lodge. He's hanging out with just his unicorn and enjoys being away from the office or the palace.
And you get the sense with him, too, that especially as this chapter goes on and he starts to unravel, or the things around him start to unravel, the reality that he thought that he knew, you get the sense that he's just like grieved and tired from it. Almost like the end days of Narnia ages him extremely rapidly. Like he starts off with this young guy, but by the end of this chapter, he's already feels old and jaded in many ways. Well, we also meet Jewel as well too, his unicorn. They love each other like brothers. They've saved each other's lives many times in the wars. I love that line. In the wars,
you fought in the wars.
You fought in the Clone Wars. And here it starts off in such a happy note, right? With the two of them being like, "This is the greatest news we've ever heard. Aslan has returned," which brings me to my first question for you, Phil. When was the last time Aslan was here?
Well, if we're reading in chronological order, the Silver Chair would be the book before this.
Correct.
But we're not.
But
But
no,
if we were chronologically
correct,
the last time he would have been seen would be at the end of the silver chair,
which we learned last chapter is 200 years ago, is what I thought originally.
Oh,
And-
are we already updating it?
Yes. So here's the thing. If you remember back to the silver chair, at no point does Aslan appear in Narnia.
In Narnia.
In Narnia. He appears in his country at the beginning and end of the book.
Okay.
He technically shows up a tiny bit to talk to Jill in a dream, but that's a dream, right?
Yeah.
So then I went back past that. All right, well then Don Treader. Well, in Don Treader, we never see him in Narnia either. He's at the end of the world, and we get visions of him like on Magician's Island and stuff, but he's not in Narnia proper, and we don't see him in the Lone Islands, which technically is Narnia proper. So the last time that he has physically been in Narnia that we know of is Prince Caspian.
Wow.
Which would have been more than 200 years before this. And as far as we know, which again, we have to assume that from like a world building perspective or a canon perspective, if we really want to get nerdy about it, right, is that Aslan has shown up in other places. For instance, The Horse and His Boy is this relatively unimportant story compared to the story of the overthrow of Miraz or of the destruction of the White Witch, right? And yet we know that Aslan physically does show up to Shasta there. So maybe there's other times too. But as far as what would be commonly known by most people, if we're to just take these books as being the main stories taught, it's Aslan maybe only shows up, magician's nephew, disappears after, I don't know, hundreds of years, shows up again when the witch's reign is over, is then gone for another 1,000 years, shows up when Caspian's reign begins, and then appears maybe at the end of this book. I had not put that together, the fact that Aslan really is not as involved in Narnia as I previously thought. If you would have asked me before I thought through these things, I'm like, oh, Aslan's in Narnia every few years.
Yeah.
Maybe not, he doesn't see everybody.
And he's in every book, so therefore he's in Narnia all the time.
Exactly, but he really isn't. And that's an interesting way to view this supposition of our view of the Christian faith too, where, it's not like we just see Jesus walking down the street right here. We don't think of God the Father as being physically, as in like tangibly, as material in an Aristotelian sense, present in your house. We're like, God's here right now, right? But we don't mean God's literally here in this exact physical
in a physical
space.
form. Yeah.
Exactly. And yet, actually, that's kind of true of Aslan in many ways too. Aslan is not around nearly as much physically as we would have assumed.
Right. I think about that too. We have the stories in the Bible, but the Lord was at work in other places in different ways.
Yes. Well, let's keep moving on to Runewent, who shows up. Great Narnian name, by the way. The centaur shows up, and how does that go over?
Well, he drinks a bowl of wine, which I think is...
He chugs this giant bowl of wine. Enough for what, 6 men?
And then just starts spitting truth. And he reveals that he has been studying the skies, which centaurs are wont to do. And when asked about this news of Aslan, he says that it's not in the stars and that it's all lies, which is a tough thing for our king to hear.
And he doesn't necessarily seem to believe it at first. In his defense, it's because it goes against everything else he knows and wants to hear.
Right. And he rationalizes how it could be. Well, Aslan doesn't have to follow what the stars say.
Exactly. And what an interesting thing this is, to hear those words from the very first book, that Aslan is not a tame lion.
Right.
And
to have them twisted.
Exactly. It takes this idea, this truth about Aslan, that he isn't tame, and it twists it into this idea of therefore it means he's not necessarily good. See, the really important thing that happens in chapter 8 when we first hear this said, he's not a tame lion. The thing that comes right after that is Mrs. Beaver says, but he's good. And so the idea of a not tame lion or a not tame deity is horrific without the caveat, he's good. Mm-hmm. So yes, we know that Aslan isn't tame, but we can also, if we want to look at this from a logical, rational perspective, we can also kind of pit it against, well, is this thing a good thing? And this is where we get into the abolition of man that we talked about in the last chapter, right? Which is that if you don't have universal law or universal morality, well, then you can't define good. And so therefore, even the idea of, but he's good is relatively meaningless in a post-modern world, right? Because who's to say what's good? And this is showing us, actually, I was going to pull this later, but I want to read a little bit from what Doris Myers writes here in C.S. Lewis in Context, which, again, you can find on our website, lampostlistener.com. You can't buy it from there, but we have links if you'd like to purchase it.
But tell you what, send us $40 and we'll mail it to you.
That's true, too. Or they'll go buy it directly from her, so why not?
Sure.
Kent State Press is where I leave it. Kent State University Press, excuse me. Here's what Dr. Myers writes. She says, also exemplary, continuing a thought from earlier, also exemplary are the efforts of the characters to distinguish truth from falsehood, reality from appearance. When scientific developments throw doubt on the factual validity of Christian beliefs, one response has been to reject thought in favor of Christianity. Lewis shows us that the refusal to think leads only to superstition. When Schiff says Puzzle should pretend to be Aslan, there is a loud thunderclap and a small earthquake. Puzzle interprets the sign that Aslan disapproves of the pretense, but Schiff argues that it is the sign of approval. He does not know the principle set forth in the abolition of man. From propositions about fact alone, no practical conclusion can ever be drawn. She continues to say this. Similarly, Tyrion's first responses are unwise and ineffective because his knowledge of traditional principles is faulty. His anger at the destruction of the trees leads him, like Moses, who had also been separated from the traditions of his people, to attack the slave-driving Calormans. Then the shame, combined with sorrow that Aslan is apparently not what he expected, leads him to abdicate. I went a tiny bit ahead there, sorry.
Whoa.
But what this shows us is just how incredibly complicated it is. It's almost as if, in many ways, Tyrion is kind of living in this post-truth world where everyone has their own truth, and depending on what you're engaging with, right? If we might want to use that word, your truth about reality might be different than your neighbor's truth, right? This is a lower T truth because in this kind of world there is no capital T truth, and that's what makes Tyrion's decisions before him so difficult. That's what leads to his rashness, is he doesn't even know what to do with all this information that's here that's all conflicting with one another.
Yeah. What happens when my truth conflicts with
exactly.
your truth? Yeah. How do you settle that?
Yeah. I mean, that's a question that our society is trying to ask right now and doesn't seem to have a good answer for,
right.
Because for logical reasons why you can't really answer that question well.
It was a really interesting. I was taking part in this training, and the training overall was very good. But it came to this awkward part where there was an example given, and someone said, I don't want to do blank because my religion is against it. And the training said, okay, we need to respect people's religion, but you need to do this because it's the right thing to do. And I thought that was very interesting because I'm not sure how you define what the right thing is. They're saying that it felt like they were saying this religion is incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be true, I guess. But it's also where are you claiming the moral authority to say that something is the right thing to do? It's just a difficult problem to have, and to how do you say that there's no I mean, this is a common thing, but how do you say there's no universal truth and have that statement be true?
Sure.
And what usually happens, and I've read this in Sapiens most recently a couple years ago, it basically came down to him saying there is no universal truth, but his version of events is correct, and that's what you need to listen to. Which is just, I don't understand how you can consider yourself so smart and then also say something so contradictory at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of that kind of what's it called? Like the new atheism, right? There's like the new atheists.
Yeah. He's one of the quote 4 horsemen of the.
Oh, who wrote that book?
This was Yuval Noah Harari.
Okay, I don't know the people who were part of that group.
He's considered one of the. I think considered one of the 4 horsemen. But
nobody's
who's the Richard Dawkins is the.
Richard Dawkins.
He's definitely one. I don't know if this guy is.
Sam Harris is another one of them.
Yeah.
I've read one of Sam Harris's books. Yeah, I listened to a TED Talk or two that he did as well too. And one of the big things he's argues.
How do you know you read it?
One of the big things he argues is he kind of tries to argue for universal law, divorced from religion. That he's everything he's there is no spirituality. There is no It is just cold, hard science. And not that religion is anti-science. It's not. We've talked about that a lot back in The Magician's Nephew. And one of the things he argues is he tries to find these kind of universal beliefs in different cultures and say that it's not necessarily connected to culture. It's not these things, and maybe there are still kind of universal laws disconnected from any higher order divine authorities. And again, I'm probably butchering his argument somewhat. I'm not attempting to do that. I'm not trying to set him up as a straw man or anything. But again, I think my issue with something like that is that it still feels shaky. The logic to me still feels disconnected from, or at least too connected to, I should say, an unstable reality. Lewis talks about this on the reading of old books, which I believe is his foreword to On the Incarnation by Saint Athanasius. One of the things, and I can just pull this up real quick. I know I have it on my computer. He says this, and I think this kind of leads us down the rabbit hole of what you were mentioning, Phil. He says, all the contemporary writers share some extent the contemporary outlook, even those like myself who seemed most opposed to it. Nothing strikes me more when I read the controversies of the past ages than the fact that both sides were usually assuming without question a good deal which we should now absolutely deny. They thought that they were as completely opposed as two sides could be, but in fact, they were all the time secretly united with each other and against earlier and later ages by a great mass of common assumptions. And this is what Lewis is so often pushing us back to, is this idea that we have to not just be focused on what's happening right here and right now, and kind of go back to what Chesterton calls, the democracy of the dead, like allowing, the people in the past a vote into our thoughts and our beliefs and our values. And that's a very countercultural idea, right? Often, a lot of times we have that chronological snobbery. Why would we let the dead, they were wrong about everything, and they were wrong about many things, but that doesn't necessarily take away all of their wisdom, and there's still much wisdom to be had there. And that's where we find Tyrion right now.
Yeah, it's difficult to build upon something if you have nothing to build upon. You can't assume anything. Mm-hmm. So everyone's assuming something, and then we're also viewing things we have a more modern lens, or now a postmodern lens, where we know so much. But I feel like there's also still so much that we don't know. So it's easy to think that now we have it all figured out, even though that's what people thought 2,000 years ago.
Socrates' main thing is I'm ignorant, right? His main idea is that I'm the reason we think of him as being so smart is because he's saying I don't know everything, and that's what makes him such that level of realization, right? And so this idea, going back to this, he's a tame lion. It comes into many of the tales. It's horrifying how that is being corrupted, even by someone like the king and Jewel, who are good people. Well, a good person and a good unicorn, right? So as this is happening, a dying dryad comes up and asks for help from the king. And we learn that what's going on?
Everybody's chopping down the forest, which is a direct connection to the dryad, and the dryad warns them shortly before their tree is cut down and they die. Yeah.
Again, horrific from this perspective, watching this dryad, this beautiful part of nature, this kind of link that Lewis has in the Chronicles to romanticism here, being just slaughtered in the name of Aslan.
Now, here's what's interesting about this. We just heard that it's not in the stars, and they are able to rationalize why Aslan may have not done something in the stars. But as soon as the quote Aslan says that you should cut down these trees, that doesn't sound right, and that gets their attention, and that sends them off to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And again, we don't actually find that out in that moment. The dryad, right before he says, who is doing all of this, she dies. We don't find out. Pretty quickly after this, Tyrion says to Runewit, you go back to Cair Paravel, bring me an army, something is going down here. Runewit gallops off, I guess. Yeah. And that's when both Tyrion and Jewel continue to try to find what's going on. They go across here, they come across a water rat a water rat who is bringing logs down on the river. And we
They're
find
all
out
tied together,
exactly
floating down on them.
what is it that's happening. He kind of shouts back, right? We're taking these down to sell them to the Calormans, the enemies of Narnia, right, on the lion's orders.
Right. And sorry, to be more precise, that's the point where they start to feel this dread that can't be correct.
And the king says that. He says, could it be true? Could he be felling the holy trees and murdering the dryads? And Jewel wonders, well, maybe the dryads did something wrong. But then selling them to the Calormans is his response. And then Jewel tells again, well, he's not a tame lion.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have a way to kind of, and again, in some kind of branches of the Christian faith, we talk a lot about the fact that God reason is an important way of understanding our faith. We might use the Bible and church tradition alongside reason to understand these things. Now, in many circles, we would hold, especially in Protestant circles, we would say, well, the Bible is primary, but then below that comes both church interpretation of the Bible and its practices, but also reason itself, like what makes sense, right? That's why when someone is struggling with lust at church, we don't actually put their hand out and tell them to chop it off, something like we go well, Jesus is telling us how serious it is, but we don't literally take it as being actually chop your hand off, right?
Yeah,
because reason would dictate that that's not something God wants you to do, and they don't have the ability to kind of process all of that together. Could it be that it's because there's a disconnect from all that Narnia has been? Is there some kind of disconnect between the fact that, again, it's only been 200 years or so since Caspian, well, I guess closer to 300 years since Caspian was restored to the throne, but there's still before that is thousands of, or 8,000 years, I should say, of no Aslan and Telmarines invading. Are they disconnected from those practices? Is it because of, something that's gone on that they have a hard time believing what we don't know, but there is some level of disconnect with Aslan himself that makes it easier for them to fall for this.
Right. And I feel like we experience this. You can see it in the Bible very quickly, but you can see it today. It's been around 2,000 years, and it's easy to be like, did that stuff really happen? And you start applying, maybe he was a really good teacher. That's the most common one that I've heard. But he didn't really feed 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. And we start coming up with ways that could have happened.
We take the Jefferson approach, right?
Yeah. You just trim out all the stuff.
All that supernatural stuff. And Lewis does the exact opposite of all of that. He says, no, I absolutely believe in the supernatural elements. It's the true myth.
Right.
Well, Phil, what happens next after they find out that it's the Calormans are being sold these trees?
Yeah, they go to the scene of the chopping and
the scene of the chopping
and the sawing down of these trees. They kind of go into the forest of Lantern Waste, and they see two Calormen abusing a horse. Mm-hmm. And then, if that's not bad enough, the horse is actually a talking horse, which means that he is under our king's rule, and this just sends the king into a blind rage.
And it's this idea that the hierarchy that was established by Aslan has been cast aside, right? Mm-hmm. And Tyrion recognizes that there is the same way we have a hierarchy here. But I know there's some people who might disagree with me with all their fur babies out there and stuff. That makes me sound like I'm like talking down to them. But like there is a hierarchy in the Bible of humans over animals. Now we absolutely should treat animals well, right, and we should respect them and take care of them. Absolutely, we should not abuse them. But there is a hierarchy over them. God gave Adam, right, the charge of protecting and leading them. And in Narnia, back in The Magician's Nephew, Aslan separates the talking beasts to help take care of the dumb beasts, and the talking beasts are kind of put on this higher footing with the hierarchy. A more medieval idea that was, is very unpopular in a modern or postmodern world, this idea of kind of this hierarchy. And it's already bad enough that the Calormans are treating their own horses this way, but it's when you realize, oh my goodness, a free talking horse like Bree or Hwyn is being used as this kind of servant and abused slave, right? That Tyrion can't he can't hold back his anger. And again, it's what he does is not good. And the book makes that clear right before he kills them. Lewis says, or the narrator says, but much evil came of their rashness in the end. Yes, what's happening is unjust, but the narrator is clear that their reaction to the thing that is unjust makes things worse. The murdering of these two Calormans in relatively cold blood, it's not that we're saying that they're, and we'll talk more about the Calormans as the book goes on. Obviously, what they're doing is not okay, but they're out doing their job. The Narnians rush up and just kill. They're not at war. They're not like run up and kill them both.
Yeah.
Beheaded and impaled.
When I read that, I thought I gotta close the book and check the cover to make sure that this was still the
same the right
series.
book here. And that's where we end. What final thoughts do you have, Phil?
Every single chapter of this entire series really has made me want to read the next one. And the way that we do this show makes it very difficult because I have to stop because I'm not supposed to read ahead. Except we did Horse and His Boy in a different manner, but for the most part, I don't read ahead. And these cliffhangers where they just impaled and beheaded someone and now I have to wait to find out what happens. It is a well-constructed story. I can see how people finish these entire books in one sitting.
Sure.
It's very well done, but I'm still shocked and I'm very curious how this series is going to go because every book has been different so far. This one feels the most different. This one feels the most extreme. And we've had kings who have killed before, but this feels different. This is not in the middle of a battle or...
No, despite Lewis does a great job as a writer here because I think it could be easy for us as readers, especially younger readers, to get this and go, yes, we killed the bad guys. And Lewis makes it quite clear that what they have done here is actually not a good thing. And it's nuanced and complicated because he's not taking the side of the Calormans either. In fact, he's saying what they're doing is horrific and abusive, right, to this talking horse. But he also makes it clear that Tyrion's response is incorrect. It's wrong. And so that leaves us in a weird place because that level of kind of moral ambiguity, which is something Lewis doesn't like, and it's just part of the story. So this obviously is not where it's ending, is not common in the Chronicles. I can't think of a character, Edmund and Eustace, I guess, but even Edmund betraying his family doesn't seem the same as killing in cold blood, in the fact that when Edmund is doing something, he's clearly the one in the wrong. Lucy, Peter, and Susan are clearly in the right.
Yes.
So his betrayal of them, it's exactly clear what's right and what's wrong.
And thinking about last chapter, if Shift had been written today by a different author, I feel like Shift's backstory would have been brought into the picture, where maybe Shift is really let down. Someone promised him that Aslan would always take care of something, and then something goes poorly, and so he's completely disillusioned, so he creates his own Aslan. It'd be very easy to do, and it's very popular today, and there's nothing against it. I think it makes for some really interesting stories sometimes, but that ambiguity is not present in these stories.
Yeah, I have something against it many times. I do think, did you see, by the way, this came out just a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, actually, now that I think about it. There was an article, I don't remember who wrote it, and I'm not going to put anybody on blast here, but it was a review of the Rings of Power series, right? And it talked about Sauron, but kind of talked about Sauron from the perspective of, like, we should kind of feel bad for him. He has been, in the show, and not too many spoilers here, but it's something that we should lament, how he was treated poorly, or how because he was maybe lonely, he sunk down into these levels, which one is just so far off from what Tolkien ever wrote. Yeah. But it also it comes with exactly what we often see in a lot of modern storytelling. And that's not to say all modern storytelling is bad. I don't believe that at all. I like quite a lot of stories that are out there today. But it's just this idea of, like, well, if someone is bad, they have to, like, have a reason or some kind of backstory that makes you feel for them. It maybe even have it in the Killing Joke, which I do not like. And a lot of people really like the Killing Joke. If listeners aren't, you tell them, because this is kind of your field. What is the Killing Joke?
It's one of the more famous Batman stories featuring the Joker. And are you referring to the Joker's kind of backstory?
It kind of, as you're seeing the Joker, fighting Batman, you also get his backstory where he was this bullied guy. And I have not seen the new Joker movie. I have zero desire to see it. I don't think it's for me. I think I would hate it, so I don't want to watch it. But it's that kind of thing, is like we have to have, all of our bad guys now have to be anti-heroes in a way, or they have to. And again, I'm speaking with a broad brush. They don't all have to be. This is not me sitting here being like, oh, everything was so much better in the past and the current modern everything is terrible. That's not at all true. We're literally recording on using technology, and we're talking about the Rings of Power that just came out last year, although that wasn't great. But that's a different story. Listen to our Patreon episodes. I did not like it. Phil liked it much more than I did. But it is just frustrating that that's so often the case. And so it's great to have a character like Shift that's like, no, just a mean, manipulative person. And whether or not he has some nice backstory is not important.
Right.
To what we're doing here.
And it's also important to remember that these are stories.
Exactly, yes.
Not everything needs to reflect reality one-to-one. It is a supposal. It's not a fable. It's not necessarily meant to just instruct. It's meant to entertain it at the same time. But sometimes you exaggerate things or make things not exactly like reality. Fiction is a lie that tells us the truth.
Where's that quote from? That's just interesting.
Without doing too much research into this, I think that it's been attributed to different people.
Oh, is it C.S. Lewis?
Well, yeah. It's probably attributed to C.S. Lewis.
I bet you somewhere on the internet it actually is.
So Neil Gaiman is the first result that comes up when I Google it, but Albert Camus is the best guess just looking at these results of who said it first. And then Picasso also said that art is a lie that enables us to realize the truth. But Picasso,
now, what book did he write?
Something about a blue period. Picasso also is famous for saying, steal like an artist, or good artist copy, great artist steal. And I think even that quote belongs to somebody else. It's just...
Well, that would make sense. I think you have to steal that quote for it to be meaningful.
For it to be so powerful. Yes.
Exactly. Well, Phil, any final thoughts here in Chapter 2? It's a little bit of a shorter episode for us today as we just kind of sit here in awe, horrific awe of yes. what Narnia is.
I feel like this chapter was designed to be short, to have a surprising conclusion, and to propel this story forward.
Yeah. The next chapter, Phil, Chapter 3, is The Ape in Its Glory. Give me an idea. Where are we going now?
Well, just looking at the title and the picture that goes with it, I am assuming that the ape has put himself in charge under Aslan's authority, of course. And
you mean Aslan has put Shift in charge?
Do what?
You think Aslan has put Shift in charge, you mean?
Yes. Well,
he's in control. He's back.
If he's truly back, which we know that he's not, because it's a donkey. But I imagine that we are going to get some real interesting conversations between the true king and this ape.
Yeah.
That would be my guess.
Is it also interesting to you, and maybe it's not, and so this is just a silly question, but it is for me, that we're now 2 full chapters in, and at no point we haven't had any children show up here to save the day.
They may have cut off those portals because just so many kids were coming back with swords and
they're like, this is
mature perspectives. And
yeah. So, do you think that that's coming for us?
I feel like it would be very odd if we did not have 2 children appear. Maybe some relation to the children from the first book. Maybe their grandkids. I could see happening, but
we get some new characters here.
Yeah,
I mean, we already have.
Maybe it's just animals.
Yeah,
who knows?
I think what is
new characters.
What is odd? Think about reading this book from the perspective of a young one is the fact that like our main protagonist is, I don't know, let's put it right at 23. It's between 20 and 25. It's a 23-year-old, like not a young adult, but still an adult, right? That's not necessarily. I don't know a ton of children's literature that's like, who's going to be our protagonist, 20-year-old.
Right.
No, I think that's great. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think it's surprising.
Usually they have someone who is much younger played by someone who's much older.
That's true.
Like when we had Spider-Man played by a 40-year-old, or Prince Caspian played by a
Yeah,
4-year-old.
or I was gonna say, or Prince Caspian. Wait, I won't bring that one up again. Well, Phil, before we go, we do have some listener feedback. We have a voicemail today, so let me go ahead and play that for us.
Hi there. My name is Rachel, and I live in Idaho. And I've been listening to your podcast. I found it not too long ago. Currently, I think the last episode I listened to is Chapter 4, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So first of all, I just wanted to say it's been really fun to go through these books. They've been a really influential part of my life. Really thankful for them, and also thankful for you guys, just as a way to get back into them as an adult. And so anyway, what I wanted to say, you had asked in the Chapter 4 episode about Edmund and Lucy's role in Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Like, did they really have to come back? And I think they did, because someone had to get Eustace to Narnia. How else is he going to get there? And how is he going to react if there's not somebody there who's been there before that he can sort of tag along with? So I think they're mostly a transitional role as far as getting Eustace into Narnia, getting him interacting with Aslan, so that he can have his redemptive arc. But also I think they are still thinking that they need Narnia, and so they go back and are all excited, and they have a few important character growth moments to get them to realize that, no, actually you are ready to just be in your world and get to know the Aslan in our world, like who he is in reality, get to know Christ. So anyway, I am sure now that it's 2022, you recorded that episode in 2019, or actually it's 2023, it's January. So, that you've talked about this already and probably came to your own conclusions, so I'll find them eventually. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Thanks so much for doing your podcast, and I look forward to what else you got. Bye.
Well, Rachel, thanks for leaving us a voicemail. First of all, we love voicemails, and it's great to hear directly from people and to hear where people are coming from, what their voices sound like, but also what they're thinking and what their thoughts are. And it's fun that we recorded that so long ago, and we have people that are discovering the show and sticking with us as we go through all the books. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's funny. Rachel mentioned that. Yeah, we probably already answered this. I'm pretty sure we did not.
Yeah, nothing came to mind.
I don't think we did. We have been open about the fact that, we've said this many times before. We edit the podcast I edit all the podcasts. I should say we, that way if there's a mistake, like that one was Phil, but if there's ever a mistake, it's me. It was my fault. But after I edit them, I send them over to Phil and he listens to them, and then we release them, and Phil and I never listen to them again. So every once in a while, there might be a mistake or something, but there's also there'll be loose ends where you and I say, oh, we're going to do this, or we want to answer this question, and then we just never answer it because we forget to do it.
Whenever I listen to a podcast interview and someone says, we'll discuss this more later, but I did want to just say blank. Mm-hmm. And then I just think they're never going to come back to this.
It's hard to remember. Yeah.
There's no accountability there.
So I like the fact that Rachel brought this up, because when this voicemail came into us, I listened to it and I was like, oh yeah, that is interesting. I just happened to reread Voyage of the Dawn Treader with a group of fifth graders this past fall, and was thinking a lot about the way that we were going slowly, because we did it over the course of 2 months, which is really a slow go at it. If you think it's only a book with 16 chapters, and it's not long, it's about 150 pages or so.
Before you go on, I want to talk about that. How long do you think it would take to read a book, a chronicle?
It could take a lifetime. It could take just a few hours.
How long would it take you to read if you just sat down and read it all?
I'm not a fast reader.
I think that's why it's a good.
Probably it would probably take me about a week with being a dad and grad school and work and stuff going on. I usually try to read for about, at this stage in life, it's only about 15 minutes a day of pleasure reading. Yeah. I wish it was more. It's usually at the end of the day, and at that 13th or 14th minute, and I'm like, all right, I'm falling asleep, unfortunately. Yeah. But so it would probably, Now, if it was Narnia, I'd spend more time on that just because I enjoy reading them. But probably about a week or so. I'm sure that just like you, I mean, I could sit down and read one in a day, but
in terms of hours,
I prefer not to.
I feel like it would probably take maybe 3 hours.
3 or 4 hours, yeah,
to read one book. Maybe 15 minutes a chapter.
Yeah.
15 chapters.
Kendall says that I take about 12 minutes to read any of the chapters.
Yeah.
So, is that what you were going to say too?
It's just interesting to me as a kid. Having all 7 in the same book. Wanted,
no one should have ever. Your grandma should not have given you that. It stressed you out.
I asked
clearly.
for it.
Okay.
I wanted so badly to read this entire thing, and we're just now at the point where I'm about to have finished the entire series, and I'm 31 at this point. But then we had Casey on several seasons ago, and
back in season 2, yeah,
she read all of them over Christmas break, and I just remember
which is 2 weeks. Yeah, we were working together at the time. Yeah,
that is incredible. But now that I know that, if I could really, if I had enough time and enough focus, I could read 2 books a day.
Sure.
If I really had to, like if that was the goal, I think I could do that. But
I read we just talked about Harry Potter last episode too. I read books 5, 6, and 7. Maybe it was only 7 that I read super quickly. When Deathly Hallows came out for Harry Potter, I read that. We went and got the book the day, not at midnight. My sister did, but I just went that morning, like 10 a.m. or whatever, got the book and finished it the next day.
Yeah.
But that was like abnormal for me. I don't usually read that quickly. And also like J.K. Rowling is not hard. Not that Lewis is writing, excuse me, in a hard way. Here, any kind of difficult prose here with Narnia, but Rowling's not super dense necessarily. And that's not a knock against her, but yeah. So probably around that time, yeah. The one thing I did want to say, as I was answering Rachel's question before Phil needed to know all of my Goodreads information here, I guess.
Should have just looked it up.
Yeah, no, I don't have. We've been over this. I have no friends besides my wife, and I want it to be that way. In the app, not in real life.
Might recommend it.
So I was reading the book. I was reading the book with this group of 5th graders, great group of kids, and thinking a lot about Edmund and Lucy, specifically because the last time that I had read it had been through the podcast, and I did remember. I remember being kind of like, why are they here? And as I kind of read through it, thinking specifically about that question, what came up was something quite similar. Not nearly as well said as Rachel just said it. Mine would have been much more harder to understand. But kind of the thoughts that Rachel came up with, which is that like Eustace still is the primary person undergoing a story of redemption. In many ways, we have kind of this sacramental imagery of his baptism as a dragon, right? But it's Edmund and Lucy who are the ones who kind of help him along that way. And in many ways, especially Edmund kind of serves as the example for Eustace, saying, look, I have also been through a place, right, of being a jerk, really. And I made it through, and I look at me now, and not a look at me now as in I'm arrogant, but look at Aslan's work in my life, look at what Aslan has done for me. He's now going to do the same for you. And so I think that point, especially that Rachel makes, is a powerful one, and one that reminds us that, it helps remind us in a time where, the meme and stuff, like everyone thinks of the main character and stuff. I love the fact that Lucy and Edmund come back, and they're not the main characters in the 3rd book. Again, they're still main characters, but not the main characters.
Right.
Not in the same way that Lucy was in the first 2 books. She obviously is still a main character. But think about up until they get the magicians or to the island of the Dufflepuds, chapters 1 through 8, she is definitely she's a supporting character. And then she has a little bit that she does, especially at the end. Edmund himself, again, more of a supporting character. Eustace and Caspian and Reepicheep probably carry that role of more of the main characters. And I love that fact that like Lucy and Edmund have had that story told, and now it's not this one isn't their story in particular. Right. That's a good thing for us to remember in a time where, the world around us and social media and everything tells us like we're the most important. It's our
we're the main character.
We're the main character, to be reminded that no, we aren't. Well, Phil, I think that's a great place for us to stop.
Yeah, and I'd also just point out that I think that in our journey with Christ, we have our moments of great change, but we also have our moments of using what we've learned from that change to help help other people in their journey as well.
Yeah. Well said. All right, bud. Well, like I said, we'll be back next time with Chapter 3, The Ape and Its Glory. Why don't you end us with our little end credits here?
All right. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to John Marr, Emily Wakefield, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. Listener feedback can be sent to thenarniapodcast@gmail.com, or if you want to leave a voicemail, 406-646-6733. You can find all of our previous episode links and book information at lamppostlistener.com. We'd also appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts. This helps other listeners find the show and join our read-through. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 3.